Well, hello again. I have to apologize about my voice today. It's been a long week. And today's footage is a little bit more of the footage from while Emily was on her cruise. And I was working on getting the box pieces put together. Now I picked up a set of hinges that I was going to try and use, and I decided I was going to change how I did the lid, which turned out to actually make it so the hinges don't work, so I got to figure something else out, but that's okay. For the record, I will never use a pull saw or a push saw ever again. Using these Japanese pull saws has been pretty amazing, actually. So that's definitely something to consider. I wasn't sure it would make a difference, although it makes sense that it would make a difference, because as you push into the wood, if anything binds, it's just going to allow the saw blade to buckle and bend, which I'm horrible at. I don't know why. I suck at using a push saw. But those were a Christmas gift from Emily one year, and they have been quite amazing. Like I said, I'll never use a push saw again, but this is the tedious part of any woodworking project, particularly since I'm basically stuck trying to use the sander to try and fix some of the problems that were left from using a table saw to do jobs that a table saw wasn't intended or designed for. Trying to flatten these pieces was definitely challenging. Having that planer sure would come in handy right about now. But that's okay, it gets the job done. Oh, after I did this for a while, I actually realized that we have a little hand planer. I'm not sold on yet. It was a gift from Emily's sister and brother-in-law, and it's been awesome at what it does. I'm just not very good with it. So I just need to practice with it, but later on I end up making a mistake, and I took all of the long boards and cut them up, forgetting that I needed a bottom for the top tray of the box. So I had to go find a scrap piece. Luckily I still have some smaller scrap pieces of ash, and I was able to mill that down, and I actually used the hand planer to bring that into to make it flat, which I was able to actually get that to work really well, so I was pretty pleased with that. That's one of the downsides of using the table saw to try and rip with. It's really easy to have just a little bit of an angle as you're cutting, and you end up with either a convex or concave shape, unless you're holding it just absolutely perfect. I know that I've seen a lot of people on YouTube who have made jigs to do that, and they use it to hold pieces that they're trying to make rips from. But it is what it is. Someday I'll have a shop and we'll be able to build all kinds of jigs to leave them hanging around and wherever. That day is not quite yet today. So just trying to clean the corners up and square them off a little bit. I made a rookie mistake and as I was sanding ended up rounding some of them up a little bit. So I'm trying to just shave them and clean them up just to get a tighter fit on the corners. Now I haven't done anything like this in probably 30 years, I guess, since I was in middle school. And I don't think, even then, I don't think we ever did anything this intricate. So there's definitely some learning curves here, but that's okay. Since I'm not doing it for, any kind of production purposes, it's alright if I take a little extra time to sort of figure things out as I go. Now back to sanding. Realized some of these were slightly different thickness, so just run them back through the table saw again. And at some point it would have been really great to remember that I have a router table, and I could have done a lot of that much easier with the router. But that's okay. It is what it is. A big chunk of what I was doing was just trying to kill time. So it's okay, I guess. Emily likes the edge, this live edge. I really wish I would have been able to figure out a way to leave that bark on. Maybe the trick would have been to just let it sit until it, fell off, and then just glue it back in place or something. I don't know. It definitely looked much better, in my opinion, at least. So I'm figuring I'm done with the I think I had 60 grit, 60 or 80. So now I've moved up to, I think I had 60 and now I'm doing 100. And then I got some 150 and some 220, I think is where I ended at. And there's a lot of opinion on YouTube especially about that you have to work your way up and not skip any grit. So going from 60 to 80 to 100 to 120 to 150 to 180 to 200 to 220, and maybe someday I will try that and see if it makes a difference, but in all my 30-something years of building furniture, I've never found anything where that was necessary. I do, obviously, work my way up. But hitting every single grit seems to me to be an unnecessary waste of time and expense. Now, that said, I usually would be building things out of pine and fir, and that's a lot more forgiving probably than hardwoods. I haven't done any finishing with this with ash yet, so we'll see how that actually turns out. And maybe this will be a lesson learned that you really do have to go through every single grit. So what I'm doing now is just letting that, it's called water popping. You put a little bit of water on there and it makes the grain pop up so that when you sand it the next time, it'll see. And here's that mistake I was telling you about. I should not have cut that. These ones should have been cut, but the shorter one was the bottom of the box. Anyway, so the water popping makes it so the grain becomes a little bit rougher as it absorbs some of that water, and when it dries it stays that way, so then when you sand it again, you sand it smooth. And I did that with each of the finer sandpaper grits, so that way it would it would stay smooth. And so you can see, here's where I just realized that I messed up, and so now I'm trying to figure out how I can make that work. So it's now the next day, and time to do some more sanding now that things have dried. And it's hard to tell, but the pile has grown a little bit because after the battery died last night, I was able to get that extra piece finished up and ripped down into a couple of pieces. So that's these guys right here. So I'm just checking to make sure they're flat, which they definitely were not. So I decided to start sanding, just focusing on the middle, and then I kept sanding and focusing on the middle, and then at some point realized, this is taking way too long. I think this board, if I remember right, was able to actually get done decently. And my idea with this piece of cottonwood underneath was that it's a nice soft wood, and so you noticed a couple times I sanded that way it would be nice and smooth. And I figured that would be a better choice to use for as a table, since I don't have an actual workbench. That way I don't mar the boards any more than necessary, because as I move them around, especially as I'm pushing down with the sander, I noticed that it'd get a little bit of a mark from the table saw's roof, or the table. Had my fire going and I put some cottonwood that was a little too wet. So I've got the new bottom, and I'm just trying to get it trimmed up so that it'll fit in here. I figured that since I have a new bottom to the tray, it would be kind of cool to do the bottom of the box out of the same piece of wood. So when you take the tray out, the grain is almost identical on the bottom of the box and on the bottom of the tray. And so I'm just slowly working my way around, and then using the knife on my pocket knife to just clean the corners up just a tiny bit, and make sure everything fits as neatly as I can. I don't have a flat-toothed blade, and so it leaves just a tiny bit of a groove, which is what I'm just working on cleaning up and straightening. Chisels would probably have been a better choice. And while I have chisels, they are in the tool shed, and like I said, most of the time I'm working on this, I'm just thinking about what I'm doing, not necessarily trying to do it as quickly as possible. And I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time going back and forth, because the tool shed's about, 300 feet away from this this spare room trailer. So here is what will be the bottom of the tray. You'll notice that it's a little thicker than the other board I was just working on. The idea was that if I leave this thick, I can cut some rabbets and dados and then glue the dividers into place. And here's where I realized I needed a different tool. The sander was just going to take way too long. And I figured it was getting cold, so it's time to stoke the fire. And as you can see, that worked amazingly well. That left very little work for the sander. The first time I tried, that's only the second time I've ever used that. The first time I ended up, I built a large cutting board, basically a counter for our sink in the camper, so that when we can put that down, the sink has a little edge around the rim, and that was built to fit inside of that, so that we actually have a little bit of cabinet or working space in the kitchen. And I used that to try and flatten that, and it worked, but by the time I realized that I was screwing up with it, I had already made it so that like one corner was probably, close to a 1/16, maybe slightly over a 1/16 of an inch thinner than the rest of it, so I quit playing with it. So now I'm just trying to figure out where to put the grooves, to how big I want the boxes that the dividers create. And I figured I would be smart. SMRT smart. Although this actually was pretty smart. I cleaned up that piece of cottonwood and cut it down so that it was the exact same size as the board, so I can cut through the cottonwood and use it as a test piece to just make sure everything is exactly where it needs to be. Then once I've got it figured out, I can make those cuts on the finished piece and not have to worry about the fact that there is only one of these finished pieces, or one of these tops, without having to, go mill more. So that worked out pretty well, actually. I do, however, recommend, if you're working with wood, I guess particularly if you're using light colored woods like cottonwood and ash, don't use a pen. It soaks down into that grain and was quite the challenge to sand off. But that's okay. So I also figured on doing something a little unusual, which I guess we'll figure out when I finish the box if this was actually a smart idea or a silly idea that seemed good. So you'll notice that these dados that I'm cutting are set in from the ends of the board a little bit. The goal was to have that oversized so that I could have something to basically help lock the pieces in place. So I'll use some paper or some little pieces of thin wood or something, and when I glue the walls of the box in, the divider walls, then I'll wedge them together in that groove. Because a few of them ended up being just a little looser than I wanted. This fence doesn't like minute movements. So again, this would have been better served if I'd have gone and got the router table, but that's okay. It'll work, it'll do, and it'll still be good. So what you were seeing there, I was cutting a groove in the bottom, basically, of my test piece because I ended up making it too wide, and so I started from scratch with the bottom so I could try and dial that in as close as I could get. Now, if I had the planer, then I would actually start with the grooves cut, and I would take pieces of the ash and run them through the planer, like start with them too thick and run them through the planer every pass, taking like a 128th or a 64th or something, and just thinning them down. A drum sander would be a great way to do that as well, but that's something I don't have and is not really that high on my priority list. There's a lot of other tools that'll get purchased before a drum sander, but who knows, maybe I'll get a drum sander eventually and be like, oh man, how did I ever live without this? So now I'm just trying to get all of the pieces sanded with the 120 or 100 or whichever grit it is that I'm using now. Now I'm working my way up to the next grit, going back through all of them, and then they get water popped, and that's actually where I ended leaving off at this point. I I didn't get the box completed before Emily came home, and when she came home, we decided we wanted to work on other stuff. So I was able to at least show her the progress so far, and she likes the box. So we'll get that finished up soon, but we have a church ward dance that we were asked if we could provide lighting for. We did that last year for them, and it made a big difference in the atmosphere and feel, and that was kind of when Emily was bold enough to tell me that I needed to start DJing again, because she could see how much it makes me light up. And then so we're doing that again, and I've been spending a bunch of time this week playing with lighting, and then like the program to be able to control the lights, and we're picking up a few new lights for my daughter's wedding this spring, so that'll be pretty cool to have some additions that will help make a interesting change to the atmosphere. And they're actually lights I've wanted to get since they came out, like I think 12 years ago. They came out in 2012. They were released, called Freedom Sticks. It's a stick with a bunch of LEDs in it. Anyway, I was getting ready to glue up there, and the battery died. So we'll show you a few pictures of the progress. So this first picture is of the ash boards as I was initially getting them cleaned up and brought down to size. And then the second picture is the box when I was first working on it, and just to get an idea of what it'll look like. And then this last picture is the lid on top of the box, and you can see here's the live edge that I was telling you about. I think that look is actually really cool, but removing the bark is kind of a important thing to do. So anyway, that's where we're at, and we'll see what the next video is, and we'll see you in that next video. Thank you for your time today. God bless you and yours, and stay safe and healthy out there.